Hello and welcome to the Badger Talks podcast, the podcast that shares interviews with experts from the University of Wisconsin-Madison community about their work, research, and a little bit about what they're like as people, too. I'm your host, Buzz Kemper, and I'm happy to have as my guest Dr. Kevin Ponto, Audrey Rothermel Bascom Professor at the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery, to talk about his lab's exciting work with virtual reality. Kevin Ponto, thank you for doing the show. Welcome to the Badger Talks podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You are the Audrey Rothermel Bascom Professor at the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery. And I want to start by just asking you, what does that mean? What is your appointment?
So my appointment is really interesting. I am jointly appointed between a research institute, so the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery. So this is a research institute that we do lots of investigations into things that tend to be maybe in the biotech industry, epigenetics. My group does virtual reality research. But because we're a research institute, we don't have students. So in the hierarchy of the university, we also have appointments other places. So I'm also a professor at the Design Studies Department in the School of Human Ecology, and I have an affiliate appointments in computer science and industrial systems engineering. Okay. So I get to kind of span a lot of campus and work with lots of fun people.
That's good. So you do research only in one aspect of your job, and in the other aspect of your job, you have students who you are teaching. And
that's a really good way of thinking about it. So most of my research happens in the Research Institute, and then my teaching and professional service tends to happen in the school.
Now let's get into the research itself. This is so deep. I feel like this could be a 3-hour conversation, but I won't keep you here that long.
Yeah, thank you.
So first of all, right, I like you, but let's not wear out our welcome here. There is virtual reality, and then there is extended reality. So first of all, can you define those two for us?
Yeah, and I think it's probably gotten confusing from the outsider's point of view that we used to always use this term VR, and now there's this term XR, and what does that mean? So from an academic point of view, there's this idea of this mixed reality spectrum. So things exist in, I'm going to use the term physical reality on one end, and virtual reality on the other end. So when you're in virtual reality, everything is entirely artificial. And when you're in physical reality, everything is what we would say is real. And that there's this kind of span in the middle. So another term that people may have heard of is augmented reality. And one way to think about augmented reality is that augmented reality are virtual components that are driven by the real world. So a classic example of this is if you watch football, you have this yellow line that shows where a first down is. So that yellow line doesn't actually exist in the real world.
Right. Somebody didn't go out there
and paint that, right? But that yellow line doesn't affect the players. It's all augmented to the real world. So if you imagine the spectrum as you go down there, on the flip side of that is augmented virtuality, which is really kind of hard to get your head wrapped around.
Yeah.
If you imagine right in the middle is mixed reality. So mixed reality in its most perfect sense would be you have a virtual world and a physical world, and those are co-equal partners. So when I was a grad student way back in the day, I was trying to explore this with this idea of little remote control cars. So little remote control cars could go and push virtual balls and interface with a virtual world, and that virtual world would then impact back on the physical car and cause it to bounce around or move around. So you kind of have this idea of this co-equal virtual real world. Each one can interact with each other.
Okay.
So that's a long way of now saying people, as virtual reality systems start to become more like augmented reality systems, is this VR? Is this AR? Is this MR? People decided they didn't want to try to specify that. So we've just used the term XR to define all of these things that could be virtual reality, could be augmented reality, could be mixed reality. They all fall in this kind of camp of XR.
That is very clarifying. And I never thought about the idea that you just explained, which is that a real object can interact with a virtual object and the real object can react as if the virtual thing was real.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So now let's bring that into what you are researching and what you are hoping to find, what you really are finding. What is the nature of your research then involving VR and XR?
Yeah. So I would say probably about 10 years ago, I would have classified my work as really taking real world environments and trying to digitize them and bring them into virtual reality. So the reason we originally did this is I'd worked with another professor who had done some work where she had tried to put technology in people's homes for health purposes, and realized we don't understand how people basically monitor, do health practices in their homes. So oftentimes we think about health in the settings of a hospital, in a clinic, right? These are clean, organized, neat environments. Mm-hmm. People's homes oftentimes aren't.
Right.
But people oftentimes are able to manage their health practices pretty effectively, and we don't really understand how they do that. So she had this idea way back in the early 2000s, could we use virtual reality to simulate people's homes? And if we could simulate someone's homes, then we could start to study it and start to break apart, like, what features of this environment are interacting with the way people perform in health. So here's my really cliched example. When you take your medicine in the morning, I guess like I do you take that in the living room or the kitchen or the bathroom? And is that because of how you are, or is that because of how the environment is? I guess you could think about it like that. So do you take your pills because the environment shapes you that this is a good place to take your medicine? Or are you the one driving that and trying to have the environment work with you?
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Yeah, it totally makes sense, because sometimes people will just make a decision that I want to put the meds here because I will always see them and I won't miss them.
Right.
But if the med is to be taken immediately following a meal, then you're more likely to take that in the kitchen or in the dining area.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I did a bunch of work previously on trying to do 3D scanning of environments. This could go in a really crazy tangent too. I've been doing this in Florence, Italy, 3D scanning environments. We were trying to find a lost Da Vinci painting. As a grad student, this was amazing, right? I got to go to Florence, Italy. I got to run around museums and
wow.
Yeah, it was super cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you need an assistant? I'll just I'll hang out with you in Florence and look at art.
It was spectacular, right? It was this opportunity as a computer science student that no one ever gets.
Yeah.
So I had done this work of like, how do we really accurately create models of environments? So in that case, we've been doing it to try to figure out how we were going to try to find this painting. And we said, could we use the same methodology to capture people's homes? And that way we could recreate them in virtual reality. We could do these explorations. And from that, it actually kind of kicked off a bunch of really interesting trajectories of our research. So probably the most unexpected one is, as we're doing this, we're capturing environments, we're bringing them to VR. The FBI contacted us. There had been a homicide north of Madison. And they said, could we use the same methodology for a crime scene? And so we went out. We had one of our staff, Ross Tredenick. He went out there. He scanned it. We brought in the local sheriffs, the local FBI. We walked through the crime scene in virtual reality. And they said, this is spectacular. Like, this is really interesting. Like, we can go through a crime scene. We don't have to worry about contaminating evidence. We can see it remotely. It's archived for the future. And so we started to do this in all kinds of different capacities. We ended up, this is what I do as an academic, right? I write a grant. We wrote a bunch of them. We actually were awarded one and started to explore, like, okay, what does it mean if we can capture an environment for a crime scene? When is this useful? When is it not? And to just kind of summarize those findings, what we found is there's two different areas in which 3D scanning, at least as of when we wrote this paper, is really useful. So one of them is when you have car crashes.
Okay.
So if you have a car crash, your goal is to get traffic moving as quickly as possible. So if you can 3D capture the scene and do your investigation later, that way you can try to kind of get it cleared out, get people moving more quickly, get traffic on the road.
Okay. So instead of taking 100 photographs
Right.
there and doing and worrying about if I move this piece of tailpipe, I'm messing with the scene.
Yep. I can capture it fast and do kind of asynchronous investigation.
That's amazing.
The second one we found is for homicide cases.
Okay.
So for homicide cases, you imagine it's just really high stakes, right? Like the outcomes of these cases is usually someone going to prison for life or worse. And what the investigators say is you never know what piece of evidence might be crucial later on.
Right.
And so if you can capture the scene as quickly as you can, as close to the crime as possible, to have that archive, you can go back later on and test out theories, show that, this window was open. Yeah, this was in this particular spot. That's where it's really important. Since then, what's interesting is the cost of a lot of these 3D scanning technologies have come down. Now, having said that, what's tricky with this is that there's a whole system that also needs to catch up to it. So courthouses tend to not be the most tech-savvy environments, right? And so there's lots of challenges. There's lots of challenges of how do you maintain data security? How do you make sure that the data is valid, that come into play? So that's kind of a little bit of a tangent, but
it's great. Yeah, it's a great example. I mean, these are things that I never would have thought of. What is the physicality of capturing a crime scene in VR? Is there a special camera? How is that done?
Yep. So the tools that we had been using at the time is what's called a LiDAR scanner. So the way I describe this is you get the little laser meter at the hardware store that you point at a wall and it tells you the wall's 10 feet away. So we had a scanner that would do that, but it would spin in a circle. So it would capture, I don't remember the exact number, but something like 30,000 little data points a second.
Wow.
And it would also capture color images. So you would put this scanner in a spot and it would capture the environment from what it could see, but everything behind what it could see, it wouldn't see. So you have to move the scanner to a new location. So this was the process of how we would try to scan environments, is you would send someone out there and they move this around. Since this point in time, we've had a couple new types of technologies that have come out. The one that got my team really excited a few years ago is Apple started throwing these same type of sensors on their phones, their high-end phones. I will say Apple hasn't really done anything interesting with it. Okay. I don't really know. I have no idea what Apple's end game is, but it's been really great for me and my research team because we now have these really accurate depth sensors that people just have with them on their devices if they have a high-end Apple phone.
Yeah.
And since then, I would say what it's allowed us to do is to start to take these type of technologies and explore, okay, what can we do with this consumer-grade version of it? So it's not nearly as accurate as a survey-grade scanner, but people have it with them.
Yeah.
And so we've been doing some work with American Family Insurance in terms of using, if someone has a phone, using that to move around. In this case, now what we're looking at is how can we detect hail damage?
Oh, right.
This is another one that's just like a problem that makes sense, but is incredibly hard to do. So especially since the pandemic, there's been a move toward. Well, let me say this differently. What used to happen is there would be a big hail event, and if you're an insurance company, you would send out a person to go and inspect the vehicles to ensure that there's, hail damage, the size of it, how many different, hail dents there are.
That your car really does look like a waffle iron.
That your car does look like a waffle iron. And it's really interesting to talk to the people in the insurance company because they say, we would do all this work, we'd cut the person a check to fix it, the person would pocket the check, they would never fix it.
Yeah.
They would just pocket the money. And they're kind of okay with that. But they'd say, if we didn't have to send that person out there, if we could just send them the check, we could save a lot of money.
Right.
On the flip side, if people know that you don't send people out and actually verify these claims, you open the door for fraud.
Yep.
And that hail damage does have a lot of fraud. So that's what they used to do. Then the pandemic hit, and now a lot of claims, what you do is you can take photographs, and from the photographs you can run it through different AI algorithms. You have a person look at it. You can get pretty close to figuring out how much damage there is. The problem with hail is it just doesn't photograph very well.
Okay, right.
Yeah, because hail damage it usually doesn't actually break the paint. It just is a ding.
Right. Yeah.
So what you're looking for is this very subtle difference in a surface.
Yeah.
And a car's surface isn't a simple plane. It's this kind of crazy, if you think about it from a mathematical function point of view, it's this really crazy mathematical function.
Right.
So they really don't have any good way of doing this remotely.
Okay.
So this is a really, as an academic, this is just a really fun problem that we thought, okay, like we'll go in, Apple's got these little LiDAR scanners. We came in maybe a little overconfident. Like we've been doing this 3D scanning work. We'll just 3D scan these hoods. We'll detect the hail. It will work. And went out in the field and realized that everything we did kind of worked and kind of didn't.
Yeah. As is so true of so many aspects in life.
Right? And so we've been really working on trying a lot of different techniques of thinking about even things of like, okay, if you have a hail dent, that looks like a concave mirror. So you think about a spoon.
Correct.
So that means as you move around, light's going to reflect at a different speed than it would off the other surface of your car.
Yeah.
And running through different types of AI algorithms. And it's just been a really fun problem. And it's one of those ones that I really love as an academic because, if we can solve this, it's a win for everyone, right? For the insurance company, they get to save money. For the consumer, you go out there, you can use your phone, quick do this protocol. You can get your check quicker.
Yeah.
It's a really fun problem to think through of, okay, how do we solve something like this?
Yeah. I have a 16 Pro Max, so I could do this.
You have it. Yes.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. All right, good deal. I'm going to start. I'm going to start doing all kinds of virtual reality. No, I'm not. But that is really fascinating. And I actually have some. This gives me an idea because I do freelance voiceover work for American Families. So I'm going to ask some of my friends out there. Like, wow, how does this work? That is really great. So homicide investigations, people's habits about taking their meds and how the environment affects that, hail damage, all this stuff. Yeah, it's amazing because I have long thought of virtual reality and extended reality as being either a video game type thing or, in the case of some of these extended reality eyeglasses and things where you can say look at a sign that's written in Japanese and it'll interpret it for you, things like that, and that's all cool, but the stuff you're talking about is that goes way beyond what I imagined that one could do with this.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things I always get really excited about is how can we take our work in the lab and really translate it out into real world applications. So another area that we've been working really heavily on is kind of going back to thinking about homes and people's health is helping people age in place. So I've been working with Jung-Hae Shin, who's in the Design Studies Department, Beth Fields, who's an occupational therapist, and we've been looking at how do we do home assessments. So trying to help people age in place. Yeah. We have, the stats are just crazy in terms of the United States. We have this aging population and we have homes that are just not built for it.
Yeah.
And the way, if you want to do a home modification, the first thing you need to do is assess the home and figure out kind of what's wrong with it, right?
Yeah.
So you think about if you want to go, it's the same as going to the doctor. If you want to figure out how to fix what's wrong, you need to first figure out what's wrong.
Yeah.
So the current process for doing this, I know when I started this project, they gave us these basically this form, and I immediately was in the mindset of whatever we do, it's going to be better than the status quo because this is so crazy. Mm-hmm. But the amount of training you need to do these home assessments is just, it's really, there are very few people that have done the training to do home assessments. Because there's very few of them, that means you have to send them out in person. That means they're expensive.
Right.
It's more or less inaccessible for most people. Mm-hmm. And so we've been trying to develop a phone-based app to help people do this. So when we were originally thinking about this, we were thinking back to this idea of 3D scanning, right?
Yeah.
We've been capturing home environments. Could we capture a home environment and capture it in 3D? You'd send it to somebody off-site, so you remove the need for the person to drive to your house to do it. Mm-hmm. But as we did that, we started to realize, going back to this Apple iPhone super good sensor, that we could use augmented reality to help in the assessment process for the person doing it right there.
Yeah.
And I feel like so much of augmented reality, especially for phones, is pretty gimmicky.
Yeah.
Right? Like Pokemon Go is still the primary example of this, but you have the IKEA, see how this thing fits in your space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? That's kind of the other classic example. And it's always really tough to try to position. It's not that it doesn't fully not work, but it only kind of works, I would say. Right? And what we realized with this is, could we start to help people in terms of using this to perform measurements, to show them different types of compliance needs. So let me give an example of this. Mm-hmm. So if you have a grab bar in your bathtub, it has to be a certain height off the ground, in this height range.
Yeah.
So the thing with your phone is that you can detect the floor and you can immediately show what that height range is in the room.
Yeah.
So if you need to make sure that all of your outlets and your light switches are, you imagine normally you'd have to go and measure each one of these individually. With AR, we can just show you.
Yeah.
Right?
And
so all of a sudden, I think we really see a lot of potential of taking these things that have been traditionally thought maybe more in an entertainment space and transition them into what kind of real world problems can we start to solve with this type of technology.
Yeah. It makes perfect sense. And we've covered a lot of the really positive aspects of this that can be used in research. And I imagine, I just can barely imagine all the possibilities. But before I let you go, I feel like we should also explore the dark side of the Force.
Yes.
So there are people who are a little afraid of this. It's, are we going to end up living in the Matrix? Is this leading us to a world where actual human interaction is a rare occurrence, and we're kind of living in this computer bubble? Yeah, take us a little down that road.
let me start to talk about some of the maybe more scary things to consider.
Yeah.
So maybe one of the first ones to think about is we all live in what we would essentially agree to as the same reality. And if you already feel some tension there to say, we seem to live in the same reality but see things differently.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Now imagine that we put our headset in and we have virtual content. And so when I look at a wall and you look at a wall, there's actually different things there.
Right.
So it isn't just that we perceive them differently. We see the same thing, but we perceive them differently.
Yeah.
Now we see different things. And I have no idea what your reality is and you have no idea what my reality is.
Right.
So that's kind of scary.
That's kind of scary.
Right?
Yeah.
And as we start, another thing that I think becomes pretty scary is if you imagine, right now the headsets, I would say the form factor is kind of a ski goggle style form factor, pretty clunky.
Yeah.
But we've seen some prototypes in which we get down to things that look like sunglasses or glasses.
Yeah.
Which is what we've seen in movies, right? Put on these glasses, AR content, comes into view.
Yeah.
So again, we now no longer have a shared reality.
Right.
Now, theoretically, those glasses see everything I see. So you think about the privacy aspect of, imagine if pick whatever tech company you want to be concerned about, knows every single thing you see during the day.
Right. Right. Yeah, they already know what we're looking up online.
Know what we're looking online.
If you start looking at bicycles, you'll start seeing ads for bicycles. Now, that's going to be taken 5 steps further.
Right? And then to add one more layer to that, imagine that now you can also start to manipulate what the person sees.
Yeah.
So you could blank out people or products. You could highlight certain things. You could start to steer people.
Yeah.
And I think the combination of where AI is and where XR is has some really scary implications. And you start to imagine AI agents. So the AI agents in which you can talk to and they talk back to you.
Yeah.
Some of those are incredibly compelling.
Right. Yeah.
It's still a computer and a voice. Imagine now there's like a virtual person.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty crazy.
One last thing is so about a year ago, Apple released this Vision Pro headset that they haven't done much with. But one of the things that's interesting for the people that used it, so Apple was pitching this less as we're going to do a virtual reality thing and take you entirely out of your space. And their primary use case was, okay, as opposed to buying a huge TV or having a bunch of monitors, imagine if you just had virtual monitors and virtual stuff that would float around your space. And one of the things a lot of people that use this for extended period of time realized was that their brain started to associate that virtual content as being really there.
Yeah.
And when they took the headset off, there was this feeling of, for lack of a better word, disappointment.
Yeah.
Of disillusionment that wait, I thought this was reality and now I've broken it.
I played one VR game one time at a friend's house, and when I put the goggles on, I adapted very quickly. But when I took them off, I almost fell over. It was so disorienting. I almost lost my balance. Yeah, it's very strange. Are there enough, or do you feel, in your opinion, are there going to be enough gatekeepers as these technologies develop? Do you think there will be enough gatekeepers to prevent the really bad stuff from happening? How optimistic or pessimistic are you about that?
Yeah, boy, that is a great question. I think what we strongly need is stronger regulation than we currently have.
Okay. Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah.
That I think the technology has come so quickly, and right now I think AI is in front of XR, but you can imagine that the problem is that I think, as a society, we're still kind of grappling with like, what does it mean to have this technology that can start to generate responses that seem intelligent?
Yeah.
In terms of the XR technologies, what does it mean to have, again, devices that currently are mostly the cameras they're trying to use to figure out where you are in space and figure out what room you're in. What happens when those start to be used to sell you ads or invade your privacy or
right.
And I think we're a little bit behind as a society and in terms of policy making, thinking about how to regulate that.
Okay.
So I would say I'm hopeful that we can get to the point where there's enough of a push to try to develop better regulation.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing I thought about too, just because it seems like government is very reactive. A problem happens, and then 2 years later, somebody will say, maybe we should deal with this. And so, yeah, that's a little worrisome. We are running out of time, but one quick thing I want to ask you, just to get off the heavy stuff for a minute, is when you're not doing all this research and teaching and all this kind of stuff, what do you do? Do you have hobbies? Do you have sports? What? Wait, I know you have a 10-month-old, so that probably takes a little time.
I've got a 6-year-old and a 10-month-old.
Okay.
So that has definitely slowed me down.
Yeah,
I will say. Yeah, I really am a big fan of biking. I bike year round into campus, so that's always fun.
Oh, terrific.
And we have got my house is kind of interesting. We've got chickens and kind of a garden. We've been on a garden tour.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Very cool.
And I actually am a big sports fan too. But the young kid has definitely, the baby has slowed me down a lot at the moment.
Yeah. I've heard that children require some time, from their parents.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah, my trajectory, I do not have kids, but I know, I have some idea. Terrific. Well, I'm also a bicyclist too, so I'm totally with you on that when I can get out. Kevin, thank you so much. This has really been enlightening. I came into this interview knowing I feel like I had an amoeba level understanding of what you do, and now it makes so much more sense. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. You've been listening to the Badger Talks podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Kevin Ponto, Audrey Rothermel Bascom Professor at the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery, speaking about his lab's work with virtual reality. Please browse our previous episodes for other topics that may be of interest to you. The Badger Talks podcast is a creation of UW Connects and produced at Audio for the Arts Recording Studios in Madison, Wisconsin. Our music is composed by Bill Purdy and performed by the UW Marching Band. I'm Buzz Kemper. Thank you for listening.